folks have joined us now, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi again, everyone. Welcome to PMP Live. My name is Michelle, and I'm a bookseller with our Children and Teens Department. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are so excited to celebrate Meera Trehan's debut novel, The View from the Very Best House in Town. She is joined in conversation by Chari. We'll drop the link for purchasing the book into the chat box, so be sure to reserve your copy today. We are excited to offer signed copies while supplies last, and you can check out our website for Sheila's books. Tonight, you can ask the authors questions by clicking Q&A located at the bottom of your screen. You can also vote on your favorite questions, and at the end, we'll have time to go over some together. And as always, we ask that you remember this is a creative, safe space and that folks be respectful of one another in any questions and comments. We also have closed captioning available for tonight's event as well. And on to our event. It is my pleasure to introduce critically acclaimed authors Meera Trehan and Chari. Meera grew up in Virginia, just outside DC. After attending the University of Virginia and Stanford Law School, she practiced law for over a decade before turning to creative writing. Fond of cookies and poetry, Meera didn't grow up wanting to write novels, but she loves it now. Sheila is an author and teacher. Her works include the sci-fi adventure series, The Unexplainable Disappearance of Mars Patel, Finding Mighty, a Junior Library Guild selection, and Vanished, an Edgar finalist for Best Juvenile Mystery. She is a faculty member at Vermont College of the Arts and teaches fiction at Mercy College. We're excited for her next novel, Karthik Delivers, which comes out this April. So for The View from the Very Best House in Town, it's already received praise from Booklist, Kirkus, School Library Connection, School Library Journal, and fellow authors. It's an insightful exploration of friendship at home, and in it we find Asha, Sam, and Prestyn navigating middle school, and Donnybrook Mansion, a house with opinions of its own. And now I'm excited to turn it over to Meera and Sheila. Enjoy.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to this evening. And it's such an honor for me to be here with Meera and with Politics and Prose. And while I'm sad that we can't all be in person, it's still wonderful to be here virtually with each other. So as Michelle introduced me, I'm also a middle grade author. And I have written mostly mysteries, although my latest book, Karthik Delivers, is a humorous upper middle grade novel, and it's coming out this April, and it's all about Indian grocery stores and acting. And I also teach at VCFA's MFA program in writing for children and young adults. So I live, breathe, write, and teach children's writing. So I can certainly tell all of you that you're in for a treat tonight with this inventive and thought-provoking novel about belonging and community and houses. I was so delighted to read Meera's novel and to talk with her this evening about her writing journey and how she came to write The View from the Very Best House in Town. So let's get started. Meera, it's great to be here with you. So my first question is, I noticed that you have a background in law, and I was wondering, so how did you go from there to becoming a children's author? What was your journey?
So before I answer that question, I just want to thank you so much for joining me in conversation. I think we're going to have a great evening, and it's been great working with you and getting to know you so far. And I want to thank Politics and Prose, which was my bookstore long before I even thought about becoming an author, and I attended events there. So it's so special for me to be with Politics and Prose tonight, even if it's not in person, and thank the audience for coming and listening. So you're right, I didn't, so often I think when authors are asked, how did you become an author? The answer is, well, I always wanted to be one. And for me, there were clues early on. Like, I was an avid reader growing up. I loved poetry. I loved to read it, write it, and I would read everything. And I would even sort of make edits like, gosh, this mystery would have been better if they had planted that clue like 30 pages earlier. Like, but I really wanted to be a lawyer. And I was lucky enough to be one for over a decade. I worked with some terrific, terrific colleagues who became friends and on issues that I felt were really important to make a difference. But of course, there are a lot of ways to make a difference in the world. And as I was practicing, I noticed I was, in addition to still loving to read and loving the writing part, particularly of my legal jobs, I was growing increasingly jealous of people who'd be like, oh yeah, I'm a writer. And I'd be like, oh, why did they get to write? And I realized the healthiest impulse, like way to channel this impulse was to actually try it. So I did end up taking a break from the law. And one of the first things I did when I had time was to register for a writing class at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland, which is close to me, just an intro writing class. And I loved it. And it's funny, I had an idea for a novel actually that I told my first instructor in the parking lot, like when we were walking in, and she's like, you should write that novel. And I mean, this is a very introductory class. We were just doing short exercises. So, and I was like, but I was really like, I can't write a novel. Like, what are you thinking? But I was like, okay, great, whatever. I mean, and it was really years. I still wrote during that time and I did exercises and took more classes and tried picture books and poetry, but I was like, I don't know how to write a novel, which in fairness to me was true. I didn't know how to write a novel. And what finally got me to try was the realization that it didn't have to be perfect the first time, and it probably wasn't going to be perfect the first time, and that was okay. And I took one class called, it was a 2-hour workshop. It's just called How to Write a Lot. And the secret, which it shouldn't be a secret, was like, you just write. Like, you don't go back and re-edit the same 5 pages over and over, which might not even be your beginning when all is said and done anyway. Just get something down. And then I was at, about 2 months later, maybe, I was at the National Book Festival with Kate DiCamillo was speaking, as a famous children's book author. And she was talking and she's like, oh, this book, someone asked her a question about it. Oh, it was relatively easy. It took me like 3 or 4 drafts. Usually it takes me 8 or 10. And for me, that was like a light bulb moment though. Like, instead of being horrified, I was like, I have that many chances to get it right. Like, maybe I can do this. So that's how I started writing novels, and specifically for children. I mean, I think the one thing about, a lot of writing, but particularly novels, is no matter what the form, change is really has to be at the heart of them in some way, whether both the characters change, whether they're witnessing change, whether they're affected by change. And I think there's no time like childhood where change is more exciting, more exhilarating, more heartbreaking. And so I think there's so much room for story there. I also think when you're writing for kids, I mean, Sheila, tell me if you agree, but like, it's like, you can't fake it. Like, they need a good story. And I like that. Like, the writing can be literary, it can be more commercial, it can be funny, it can be like these wonderful graphic novels. Like, there's so many ways to tell it, which is really fun, but there's got to be a good story at the heart of what you're doing. And I grew up reading, I said a lot, but also lots of mysteries. And I think like the heart of a mystery is just a really good story, to me. So that's how I did. And now, I mean, I love writing for kids, and I love being a part of this community too, of children's book writers.
Absolutely. I noticed several things that you said. One was that it seems like, and maybe you didn't exactly say this, but it occurred to me that you knew that you wanted to write even from an early age, that there was something about writing that always drew you in, even when you were little. And that's something I recognized in myself only looking back later. But the other thing I noticed, which I thought was really important, was that with your first book, you gave yourself permission to not get it right away, to give yourself that time. And I think a lot of times, for at least for some of the younger writers that I see, or who are just starting out, that there's this impatience to get things done. And really, like, that time before we publish our first book is so special. It is the time to not get it right away, and to be imperfect and messy. And it sounds like you embrace that, which is great. And I think that makes us more creative when we give ourselves time to take time and to take risks. So yeah, so I like that all resonates with me. And I'm wondering, so with all of that happened with this revelation to write and then writing and all that stuff, how did you get inspired for this particular book, which is so unusual in so many ways, and we're going to get into that, but what inspired you to write The View?
So I think, sort of like with the other novel I mentioned, which I, mentioned, I had the idea of years before I wrote. I feel like not that I've written that many novels, for all the novels I have written, though, there's something kind of percolating in my head for at least a year, maybe even a few years. Just the idea of something, or a question I'm turning over, or a character, some small bit that just keeps coming back. And for this, it was probably sort of more thematic questions. I was really, in a way, this is like a really long answer to questions I was grappling with, like thinking about with kids, like, what do we show them we value versus what we tell them we value? Because often we say, like, oh, we value kindness and we value compassion. But then as parents, maybe because of our own anxieties, we want so badly for them to be happy and make sure that they'll feel successful. We really push more traditional markers of success, like academic success or athletic success or social status or material things. And I was turning over a lot of that in my head. I was also thinking about ableism. I was also thinking a lot about friendships and how sometimes they're the most beautiful friendships you see among young kids, and something happens. I remember it from when I was in middle school too vividly, like they just start to fray and there are all these forces at play that, generation after generation it plays out. And I wanted to examine, well, what are these forces? What do pull, people who, got along so well suddenly in opposite directions? So that was percolating. And then the characters of Asha and Sam and their families kind of came to me. And then the idea of the house, which, and suddenly I had this book that, was later described, I think, perfectly as part thriller, part friendship story, and part real estate listing. So, Asha and Sam have been friends for so long, they just take for granted their friendship. And just like Asha takes for granted that the house, Donnybrook, is the very best house in town. And it's only when Sam starts going, to this prestigious school and starts pulling away from Asha that she has to sort of take a step back. And then he seems to befriend her nemesis who lives in Donnybrook and has kept her out. And, she really has to evaluate who she is in this situation, especially then it seems like Prestyn, who's befriended Sam, is actually not much of a friend to him at all. And so, it was sort of the coalescence of all these different threads that, inspired me to write this book.
Yeah, it's so true that friendships at this time, they're so strong and meaningful. And yet, when you lose a friend at this age, maybe at any age, you feel such a sense of betrayal. And I think you capture that so well, what it's like to see a friend of yours not treat you in the same way. And that really registered for me, thinking back to my younger years. Could you tell us a little bit about these characters, maybe starting with Asha, and then because you actually alternate points of view. For those of you who haven't read the story alternates from several points of view. And maybe we can start with Asha. Can you tell us a little bit about her and maybe even read a passage so we can hear her voice?
Sure. So we are lucky enough to share an editor, Susan Van Meter, and Susan once called Asha the beating heart of this book. And I just loved that because I felt like, yes, that is what I'm trying to do with Asha. So she's a 7th grade girl who's deeply empathetic and caring, and just, she wants to be a friend and she wants to have friends. And that's so important to her. She's got a great family and a fun relationship with her big brother who's off at college. And she also has a really deep love of architecture and a special interest in buildings and how they look visually. And her favorite place, in the whole world is the mansion Donnybrook. So here is a short passage from the very beginning of the book. She's up in a cherry tree, and She, off in the distance, she spies something that she's pretty sure is the Donnybrook weather vane. And this is her just watching it from the tree. Asha takes one last look in the direction of Donnybrook. Yes, it's definitely the weather vane. She can imagine the rest, the deck so high up that it's almost as if you're looking at a 3D map of the town below. And along the roof and sides, skylights and windows of all shapes, round, oval, arch, square, and rectangular, narrow and wide. And inside, columns galore, some topped with scrolls, others with leaves, and a few with nothing at all. Most of the houses in town are just what you'd expect. Ramblers with galley kitchens and first floor master bedrooms, center hall colonials with formal dining rooms and symmetric windows, split levels like her own, with short staircases and basement rec rooms. She likes them fine, of course. She likes all houses, but they're nothing compared to Donnybrook. She wonders how it would feel today if it had feelings. Would it be celebrating that it was spring? Or like her, would it be nervous about something?
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I think what you do really well, Meera, is you use the house to tell us about the characters. And I can so clearly see this house and how it looks, but then it also tells me so much about what Asha is noticing. And I think that's just so wonderfully done. So who is her counterpart? How about Sam, her friend?
Yeah, so Sam is her best friend, but maybe really ex-best friend. And Sam's just a great kid. He's really smart and he achieves academically. And he's just been admitted to Castleton Academy, which he's really excited about because he is deeply interested in space and outer space, and Castleton Academy has an actual planetarium. But maybe, another reason he's really excited to go to Castleton Academy is he knows it makes his parents really proud, and this is a mark of his success, and he wants so badly to please them and so badly to be a success on their terms. Unfortunately, the first day of school and his experience at Castleton doesn't go quite as he hopes. Is it okay if I read a little bit from the first day of school for you?
Yes, go ahead.
So by lunch on the first day of school, Sam has learned an important lesson. It is different being ignored at a big school than a small school. At a big school, you can think you were left out by accident, that in the big bang of lunch or recess, some matter is bound to be flung to the outer galaxies, and it just happens to be you. Besides, there are always other kids out there too, orbiting the playground games or stuck at the end of a lunch table. You're not really alone. But at a small school, you are. Everyone is thrown together in a small space, so it is real work not to answer the new kid's question. It is even more work not to look at them. So if no one is talking to you or looking at you, you might wonder if you spilled breakfast on your shirt or if you smell bad, and if you go to the bathroom to check, and neither of those things is true, you might start getting mad all over again at Asha for being weird at Prestyn's, or mad at your dad for inviting her along. You might wonder if you messed up too by answering the homeroom teacher's question, "Who can guess what surprise activity we have planned for today?" with the reply, "Planetarium," which was so wrong, even the teacher laughed. The correct answer was the first day assembly, which is not, in fact, a surprise activity on the first day of school. You might wonder why everyone around you doesn't realize you were picked to be at Castleton too.
Poor Sam. Because I understand what it's like to be in a small setting and be viewed in a very different way, because I grew up in a small town, and you're right. You really nailed it, that we notice being noticed so much more, or not noticed when there are fewer people in the room, and just the tension of that was hard for me to read through, but because I really like Sam. So you have 3 points of view, and before we get to the third one, I just suddenly thought, Meera, that maybe you should just maybe say a word about Prestyn. Why is she so awful? Like what? And I know that it starts somewhere with her initial relationship with Asha, but why do you think she's the way she is? Can you tell us just a little bit about her?
I can. So Prestyn is Asha and Sam's age, and she's gone to Castleton Academy from a young age, and she happens to live in Donnybrook. In fact, her parents had the house built and they moved in when she was about 6. And it's interesting, I sort of wanted very much to kind of show, not tell, why Prestyn is awful, like show these behaviors, because I mean, there are definitely pressures on her from, her mother is so desperate to make sure Prestyn doesn't experience pain that she sort of wreaks a different kind of havoc on her life. And maybe her father just sort of absents himself from a lot of it because that's easier. But I also think to some degree, when all of us, but especially kids in middle school with what they're going through just in terms of brain development and everything, they act in ways that even sort of after the fact, they can't fully explain. Like there are these pressures, but also, if you took them and gave them a test and said, what's the right way to act? They could sincerely answer, they could seriously say like, I would not do that, or I couldn't. And then suddenly you feel a certain power in a situation, you feel control, you get caught up in a game that I think can be really hard to remove yourself from. So, I mean, she's awful. I think there are clues to why she's so awful, but I also think I'm not sure even if she would be able to describe why she was being so awful. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it does. And maybe that's a good segue into the third point of view, which is the house, which is Donnybrook. Can you talk about that? How did you come up with thinking about it starts off with Asha wondering how the house would feel like, and then we actually get to hear the house's voice. Why did you make this decision?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to sort of my inspiration. And as I was thinking about these things, I also, because Asha, was thinking about houses, and it was really just like lying in bed, trying not to force the issue, that the voice of the house came to me. And honestly, it just cracked me up. And I was like, I'm going to just try to write this down and see what happens. And soon it was just like the most fun part of writing this book was exploring that identity. So the house, Donnybrook, as I mentioned, is this very, very elaborate mansion, 5 garages, many fireplaces, turrets of all sorts, columns of all sorts. And, it's very impressed with itself. It very much believes that it's the best because it's the biggest and the fanciest, and, believes in mainstream markers of success, and maybe to the extent there is one, has a more neurotypical mainstream view of what matters. But one reason I really liked writing the house, and there were people who thought I should take the house out early on, and we're like, why don't you just write Prestyn, or why don't you just write, the Donaldsons? The house actually does have a viewpoint distinct from its residents. And, there's almost an innocence to it, I think, despite, it's very conceited. It has a lot to learn, but, it loves Asha because Asha's like, that's a gorgeous house. So it's like, she's brilliant. She's got great taste. I am a gorgeous house, so, and although initially it's a little bit unsure about Sam treats it with respect. So it's like, well, this kid respects me, I'll respect them. And so it allowed me to explore some of these issues and poke fun of them in a way that I don't think I could have through a human character. At least I couldn't find a way to do what I was trying to do through a human character. But, we all love I don't know if we all love Donnybrook. Donnybrook's a lot of fun, but as I mentioned, Donnybrook has a lot to learn. So maybe I can read Donnybrook's sort of very first entrance into the story, so people who haven't read the book can get a sense of what I'm talking about. First things first, of course, Donnybrook could see the girl. It's a basic law of nature. If she can see it, it can see her. And thanks to the wonderfully strong winds at the top of the hill, last week's storm cleared out a number of trees, not the least of which was one of those bloated oaks that had been practically breathing down its turrets. To be fair, that tree in particular was no worse than the rest of the poplars, pines, maples, and oaks that plagued Donnybrook, blocking the view of the finest residence in Cornwall. Donnybrook couldn't see the boy she was talking to, though it hurt him all too well. Ordinarily, he'd hardly be worth mentioning in the same sentence as the girl with her excellent architectural taste. but Donnybrook has no choice in light of the boy's egregious error. He referred to Donnybrook as a house, as if Donnybrook were built simply to be an ordinary shelter for an ordinary family. The correct term is mansion. 2 syllables even sweeter than the sound of the wood chipper gobbling up a fallen tree. One last time. Mansion.
I love Donnybrooke's voice, and I love that I don't quite know what to make of this house, whether to trust this house or not. And I slowly started to realize as I was reading just how arrogant and maybe misplaced some of Donnybrooke's opinions are, and that was what was so fun about this voice. Okay, so that's just a little taste of the book. Maybe we could just talk a little bit about your writing process. And you mentioned that you did several drafts and it took you some time before you felt comfortable writing a novel. What is your process like? Do you sit down for hours and hours? Do you outline? Do you revise through the night? Like what do you do?
I sort of go through times when I'm writing and then times when I'm not actively writing. And like my non-writing times, I might be trying to read a lot or do other things in the writing world. But when I'm writing, I try to write. I sort of set word counts for the week because I found if I don't have something concrete, I'm like, I'm just going to write. And I'm like, nothing happens. I mean, something happens, but it's a lot less than would happen if I have something that I am consciously trying to work towards. And it kind of forces me to get out of my head and get words out. But I've always done several drafts in each book. I'm like, no, this one's going to be fewer drafts, and it never is fewer drafts. That always takes me a while. And, people talk about plotters versus pantsers. I am not a plotter at all. I want to be a plotter. I try to be a plotter. It just does not work for my brain and how I go. And so for those of you who aren't writers, plotters kind of have detailed outlines of exactly what's going to happen in the story. And pantsers right by the seat of their pants. I mean, I'm not a complete pantser in the sense that I do usually have a sense of the characters, and I probably have a few key scenes that I know I'm sort of trying to reach. But it takes, and when I say drafts, I mean starting from scratch, for each draft. I might have the old draft in front of me, but I'm making massive changes. Like, for example, between the second and third draft for this book, I wrote Sam's point of view. Like Sam's point of view was not in the first several drafts, and something just kept missing. But it was like missing. It was not good. It was bad. It was like, what's missing? This doesn't like hold together. And then I was like, let me just write. Like I wasn't even planning to write Sam chapters. I was like, how would Sam see this scene? How would Sam see that scene? And then I was like, oh, I think I know what's missing. So, but that said, I think like people often talk about plotters and pantsers, and my sense is, and you teach writing, so tell me, and you also, I'm really curious about your process because you write mysteries, and I feel like you got a plot, at least. I feel like it's a mystery, you got a plot, but is that the distinction is probably overblown, and it's probably more a question of when you do what, because yeah, I pants and I, but right, whatever, and oh, there's a house, and oh, let's try this, but then like by the third or fourth draft, I'm like, this story needs a plot. Like, this is not comprehensible to anyone but me. And so I've really, even if I kind of let go of any of the pretty writing or whatever, I got to figure out exactly what happens in an order that makes sense and is a gripping story, or this is just not going to work. And for this book in particular, with multiple points of views, and the chapters are short, but there's almost 50 of them. For all my, I'm going to just explore. I mean, I had then to make it chapter by chapter. This is what happens, and this is who's going to narrate it, and decide, well, does this character even witness the action? Is this the character the action is most emotionally resonant for? Or is this the character it is emotionally resonant for, but I'm trying to build suspense, so I'm not going to let the reader see, their perspective right at this moment, and, stretch it out a little more. So eventually I had to do a very detailed outline, but sort of after I knew what the story was. But what about you?
Like what you described sounds like me too. And I do agree that there isn't this one or the other. Some of my students need to plan everything out, and some of them just write. both of them have their advantages, but I think for me, what's worked is to be a slow pantser. And so like give myself, like we were talking about earlier, time and permission to write and explore. And so I always give myself 50 pages to do that and figure things out. But at some point I have to go back and arrange the material, and we all have to do that at some point, whether it comes after 50 chapters or 5 chapters. We have to make sense and we have to make decisions on what to cut and what to leave out. But I definitely think that there is a benefit to allowing yourself to pants for at least a little while so you can find out what you're trying to write. Like just the fact that you told me that you knew Sam was missing, but it took you asking many questions before you figured out that, oh, he actually needs to have a place in the book. I want to turn it over to the audience for questions in just another moment, but I'm curious, maybe before we do that, could you just share what you learned in writing this book that was fun and unexpected, and also maybe a challenge that you ran into that that you thought about. So like what was a good surprise, and then what were a challenge or two that you faced?
Yeah, so I mean, a good surprise, I think we talked about a lot about writing Donnybrook, and I think in a way this sort of built my confidence in my not very efficient method of getting things out and letting myself explore a story. And it helped build my trust in myself, that not that I can always, like, obviously I write things that are not good, but that it's okay to experiment and just have faith in the process. So both with, Donnybrooke, but also there's a video game I made up called House Haunt in the game, which was a lot of fun. And I didn't write this book thinking I'm going to make up a video game, but then suddenly it seemed like the best way to sort of tell the story and show this friendship between these two kids. And then it sort of took on a life of its own. So, and then I got to sit down with one of my kids and say like, hey, does this actually work as a video game? So that was super fun. I would say, although this was a challenge, this was, a very good experience for me. By far the hardest thing was writing Sam and Asha, because they're autistic and I am not. And as characters, they always were. And I can't imagine the story any other way. But even though I care about a lot of autistic people and I have an autistic family member that I love dearly, I knew that wasn't the same thing as being an autistic writer, writing autistic characters. And for a long time, I wasn't sure if I could even write this novel. And it was sort of, I started writing it, drafts of it, more not knowing if I'd ever try to get it published, just thinking this is something that is in my head that won't leave me alone. So I need to try to get this down on paper for me, even if nothing happens with it. But during that time, I did a lot of research. I read more autistic writers. I listened more to autistic adults. And I tried to really educate myself about children's literature and the representation and misrepresentation of disability within children's literature. I tried very hard to get it right, but it was good. I did that like early on because I and deeply care about autistic people. I was like, I'm going to make these characters perfect. They're going to be so amazing. Everyone's just going to fall in love with them because they're going to be so amazing. But of course, this is not like a superhero book. This is, notwithstanding Donnybrooke's perspective, a realistic fiction book. And like real people have flaws and are complicated. And, if the disabled characters have to be perfect, that's really denying them their full humanity. And so, it was a challenge, definitely writing these characters, because it was so important for me to get the representation right. And it was something that literally with every sentence I wrote, I was like thinking this through. And also I hired a wonderful sensitivity reader who was extremely, extremely helpful. But yeah, it was definitely not easy. And I don't think and I don't think it should be easy either. Like, I think that kind of work you should take seriously.
Right. No, it sounds like you've been very thoughtful in thinking about these issues. And I know for all of us as writers that at some point or another, we are going to grapple with issues of representation and also um, sort of examining the stereotypes we might fall back on or the easy way out. And I think we're all trying to do better. We're all trying to read our work with fresh eyes and seek other people's opinions. So it's great that you did that kind of work. And I know that we could all benefit from that, no matter what material we're trying to render. So I'm going to turn to the Q&A. We have a couple of questions here. And as I go through these, the rest of you, please, if you have a question for Meera, you can go ahead and type it into the Q&A and I will ask her your question. So let's start with the first question here. Meera, this audience member asked, how did you decide to write in third person present tense? Did it present in any challenges?
Yeah, that is a great question. So for Asha and Sam, one issue around the representation piece is, and again, this is a personal choice, but I felt like writing in third person would be the right way to go because it gave me just that little bit of distance. I also, but I had initially actually drafted Donnybrook in first person, and I actually queried Donnybrook with Donnybrook in first person, partly because I was like, well, it's a house and it's not like it's like walking around or doing anything. So I don't have a lot of actions to describe. So I don't know if I can really do third person for it. And actually my agent, who is brilliant and wonderful, she signed the book and she's like, the one really big piece of feedback she had was like, she's like, I would put this in third person too. And it was great because the voice was funny and good, but it was a little uneven, and like putting it in third person somehow just, I don't know why, but it helped me smooth it all out. And in terms of present tense, I actually also with my drafting process with the multiple drafts, I am often toying with different with first person versus third person and past versus present as I'm drafting and kind of seeing what flows the best. But I did feel like Sam and Asha and Donnybrook are just so in the middle of this, and they don't have the perspective that you have. I mean, even though technically when you're writing past tense, you can be, you can argue that there's not really a difference, but I think sometimes with past tense, there can just be like, just like with closer, there can just be a hint more of the perspective or a hint more of the distance. Like I felt like there's so much in the middle of this that there's no distance between what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And honestly, it just flowed better for me. And it was easier for me to tell the story in third person present, even though I think I read like, luckily, I think I had already signed with my agent, but I read some Twitter that was like, you can do what you want. The only thing you can never do is third person present tense, which is like a good reminder to just like, you can only take that stuff so seriously. But
wait, what?
yeah, I know. I was like, well, I just sold a book, so I think you can, but okay.
No, I love the third person, and I think it's just such a powerful point of view. And I write in first person also, but I just hearing you talk about the things that you can do and the distance you can achieve, or also that you can go up close. Like it's just a really powerful tool. So and I love the present tense, and I find myself using it too. So I don't know who's saying you can and can't do something on Twitter, but no, I disagree. Anyway, moving on. So here's the next question. Did you do any interesting or fun house research? Did you take house tours, drive around and look at houses, read about architecture, or look at houses online?
Yes. I did all of that. Sometimes when there are open houses in my neighborhood, I would go look, I would drive around and in the suburbs and be like, oh my God, look at the turret or look at the carport. Also, there was a blog on large houses that I looked at a lot. And then I actually I checked out kids books and adult books, but particularly kids books just because they're easier on architecture generally. And then there's a staircase that like a pull down staircase that leads to a roof deck that features in the book.
Oh.
And I like just couldn't get it in my head. And so then I just like Googled, like did Google images and spent like hours looking at all the staircases. Similarly, for the weather vane, I had the idea of the weather vane fairly early on, but I was like, what is it? And I went to like weather vane specialty websites to look at all the kinds of weather vanes and what kind of metals could be used. So yes, and that was super fun. All of the house research was great.
Did you find a weather vane that looks like the one in your book with the eagle and the?
Yeah. I mean, I might have tweaked the exact position of them, but yes, there are definitely eagles trying to catch fish. I know.
That's like such a stroke of genius, and it's interesting that it's a real thing that you saw as well, because it just did so much. It was a great metaphor that you used in the book. So good to know. All right. Next question. What parts of parenting did you want to focus on with the story? Did you intentionally want to compare different reactions and experiences with Sam and Asha's families? So what parts of parenting did you want to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did. And I think with Mrs. Donaldson too. And I want to say like every character in the book, I mean, hopefully I don't act like certain characters in the book, but I understand the impulse and I've probably experienced like the impulse or the thought that every single character in the book did, even the ones like Mrs. Donaldson that are rather unkind, just that worry, like, is my kid going to have, the friends that are then going to make them happy? I mean, hopefully then I also step back and I'm like, okay, take a deep breath. Like this is not a good way to go, but I do understand those. So it was intentional, but I'd also want to say like the more important thing for me was writing a good story. So I'd say early on, I had those ideas like more in my head, but then when I was writing the story, I was actually trying to maybe not consciously pull off the more, but then focus more on the kids in the situations they were in.
Okay. Wow, we just suddenly have a whole bunch of questions. So let's try to get through them. Is there any particular moment or more than one that felt very poignant to you as you wrote it?
There were a lot. The one I read with Sam on the first day of school, and basically all of Sam in school, that feeling of wanting to fit in, writing about him wanting to please his parents when it's so clear they love him so much and he loves them, but there's this gap where he's just can't tell them everything. That was very poignant. A lot of the Asha sort of looking back on their friendship and being so aware of how it's changed and feeling so powerless to do anything about that was really poignant. I don't want to give it away, but writing the ending was poignant and seeing how these characters grow through their experience. Definitely, was emotional for me.
How did you convey that the characters aren't neurotypical? Is it explicit or do readers infer that they are on the autism spectrum? My copy hasn't arrived yet. I think that's a good question.
Yeah, so it is explicit. It is explicit. Like it is. And it's interesting. It was always explicit, but my sensitivity reader, I think, was very much an advocate of maybe making it, and I did everything she said. So what you see in the book, I think, meets it, but she thought it was very important that it be explicit. And actually, it was really important for me. I did not want to write this book giving kind of signs that, like, I wanted to write them authentically, but I feel like sometimes, especially when someone from outside a group is writing about a group, they're like, I'm going to show you this person's marginalization. And so they do so through ways that are actually very stereotypical. And maybe like if you're in a close third perspective and you're sort of more in that person's head, they would not actually be commenting on that piece of it. So I actually very consciously wasn't commenting on things I didn't think the kids themselves would comment on. But at the same time, these characters eventually sort of morphed into their very own people, but knowing autistic people and thinking about they vary tremendously, but I did sort of think like, how is Sam going to react here? Given like he knows he's being made fun over, he's very conscious of how he's being treated, but yet he's still not quite sure how to navigate that, and the same with Asha in certain situations. But basically, I tried to be as authentic as I could to who they were. I was not actually trying to signal to a neurotypical reader, hey, this is an autistic kid. And frankly, like, hopefully it's not only neurotypical kids reading the book.
Right. And I remember that the parents did a large part to help me understand situations just by their reactions and the wording they use. That I learned a lot through the actions of the parents, since that was something that came up in a previous question. This person writes, Allison writes, congratulations, Meera. This is an amazing book. Can you tell us more about projects that you have in the works?
So I have a middle grade fantasy in the work that features a lot of snow. So it's a very different, in some ways, I don't know if you feel this way, Sheila, even if you're writing a different genre, it's still, there's something familiar about writing, but I think, yes, it's definitely a different direction, at least, superficially speaking. And then I am hoping to explore maybe one day doing stuff for maybe a little bit younger readers. And then it was one of those percolating for years. I thought I had a YA short story idea, but now I'm like, can I shoehorn that into a middle grade novel? I don't know. So maybe I could actually. I don't know. Time will tell.
Did getting a book published change your relationship towards your own writing, or does being a working writer impact the way that you now consume other writers' works?
I think being a working writer does, like, this was even before I was published, but once I started writing seriously, I think, how I was like, when I was young, I'd be like, oh, they should have put the clue there. And I've become much more actually open-minded, and I'm like, writing is really hard. And yeah, maybe I had to put that there, but maybe if I put that there, then they couldn't have emphasized that other thing. So like they were making a choice. Like I've actually become much more seeing the good and less critical of other work in a way. I might also be like, oh, well, that book isn't for me. It's not that I uncritically read everything, but I think I read it with a much more generous spirit because I know how hard the work is. And what was the first part of the question? Oh, does being published? I don't want it to. I think it's hard. Like, I think I probably write my best when I'm not thinking about anyone else reading it. So that is my goal, to just not think about readers and to just try to tell a story that I'm, if not enjoying, at least intrigued by telling, something that's motivating me to write.
Do you think that the deadline, like having deadlines, changes that? This is my question, but just thinking about now you don't have like infinite time to write that first book.
Yeah, that is such a good question. So far, it hasn't been like it's been okay. But I do wonder what would happen if it, so far the time I've been given has always felt like enough time, or, with the pandemic, if I needed to ask for a little more time, I could, it worked out okay. I can anticipate that it would, especially with those early drafts where I'm so inefficient, but so far it's been okay. What about you?
I've been trying to give myself more time. I tend to be a slow writer. The Mars Patel series, I was writing a book a year, as my editor knows, and that, as our editor knows. And so that was really a lesson for me to learn to write quickly. But I like writing. I like taking my time. So I think that's one thing COVID has taught us, that there is more time than we think, whether that's a good thing or not. So I believe in taking time. Janet asks, tell us about the cover illustrator.
The cover illustrator is Nicole Miles, and she's super talented. It's funny, I was actually on a panel, I was moderating a panel for my local SCBWI chapter, the Society for Children's Book Writer and Illustrator, and her agent actually happened to be one of the panelists I was interviewing. And he said she's gotten a lot of cover work, and I think just a lot of work recently, and maybe some picture books. I'm not positive. I think she's in England, but yeah, I thought she did an amazing job capturing so much of the story, so much of the feel of the story, the characters, the house. Like, I was so pleased. I couldn't believe how well it all came together. So
it's an amazing cover. Yeah, you're really lucky. Honestly, like, we don't always get amazing covers, and you did. I mean, I love my covers, not to say anything about but your covers,
but it's like a thing, right? Like,
no, it is a thing. When you get a cover that speaks to the story, it's just such a lucky thing. Thomas asks, are any people that are close to you reflected in characters of the story? Do they know? How do you handle that, if so?
Yeah, I think they're characters sometimes who started in their first incarnation more close to people I knew. But one way I sort of actually know the story, I think when you're writing a story, the plot and the characters and the themes for it to really need to sort of be interwoven in a way where this is like the exact experience that kind of this character needs for their arc. And so one way I kind of know one way I know that I'm finally, the story's kind of getting its own legs, is that like the character's actually diverging for any of the people that I thought of. And as I said, I put a bit of myself into every character. I put, usually even at the beginning, there are amalgamations of a lot of different people, but then eventually they need to be their own people. But I also with people I know, I would always talk through if I thought that, it was relevant to someone's experience. But I do think that is really important. And, the people in my life come before any work or any book I write.
Okay. Here's a comment from Sheshi. She says, congratulations, Meera. Great job. We are very proud of you. Stay blessed always. And then we have just a few more questions, Meera, before we wrap things up. So we're getting some more comments also. Let's see here. Sabrina Maria asks, is there anything fictional in the book that you wished was real?
Oh, that's such a good question, Maria. I wish the video game that I invented was real, and I think it would be a really fun game to play.
I agree. It reminded me a little bit of Minecraft, but I told you that already.
Yeah.
But some of the names that you come up with are just so funny. All right. Sabrina says, I love what I have so far, and especially enjoy the chapter titles for Donnybrook. What made you decide to give Donnybrook the gift of such great titles? Also, how much does Donnybrook love the Donaldsons because they built and designed the house? Or is it because the house is protective of its residents?
Those are great questions. I think Donnybrook has great titles because Donnybrook's voice it has a great voice, so the titles are great too. I think with Donnybrook, it's because the Donaldsons built Donnybrook, and because what Donnybrook sees being around the Donaldsons every day, it's been taught that this is what it should value the most. And then I think there is some of the protectiveness of its residents, particularly around Prestyn, who Donnybrook has seen grow up and seen from a young girl kind of growing up. So I think that Donnybrook does deeply care about her. But I also think this is what Donnybrook has seen and has been taught to value. So this is what Donnybrook values.
All right, so we have one last question for you and a comment. So I'm going to read the comment and then we will end with this last question. So your last comment from Muncie is, congratulations on the book from Cincinnati. We're so proud. And then we'll end the Q&A with Elizabeth's question. Elizabeth asks, are your character voices more from your childhood or from this generation of kids, or some synthesis?
I would say probably some synthesis. I actually try not to use like too much slang because I think that can date things quickly. And I think as a middle-aged person using slang, you can sound like that pretty quickly too if you're not very, if you try to overdo it, like kids do use slang, but most of them use it judiciously and just at the right place. So you really have to know what you're doing. But at the same time, I mean, I think like Asha and Sam have phones. They play a video game on their phone. At one point, Sam is watching Prestyn and her friend Tessa, just like watching videos and noticing that that's basically parallel play. So I thought writing this book and, not including modern technology would not be authentic. And it was very important to me that kids reading this book right now recognize their own experience in it. But I also, I tried not, like in terms of slang or in terms of the voice, tried not to make it too specific to any one generation or era.
All right, well, I think we're going to end it there. Thank you so much for all of these really great questions for Meera. Thank you, Meera, for having this conversation with me. This has been really delightful.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just have to chime in. That was completely delightful from just an audience perspective. You both had such fascinating insight into the book and then your work process. And viewers, thank you for your questions. And thank you, Meera and Sheila, for joining us tonight. What a great conversation. Viewers, we do want to remind you of a few things. You can still click the link in the chat box to purchase your own copy of The View from the Best House, very best house in town. And we are excited to offer signed copies from Meera while supplies last. As an independent bookstore, we of course appreciate your support. And we do want to let you know you can always check out our website for updated event listings and follow our children and teen department on social media under @kids&prose. And that about wraps up our time tonight. Thank you all for joining. I don't know if either of you have any last thoughts, but thank you once more for joining.
I just want to say thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you, Sheila. And thank you, Michelle, and everyone at Politics and Prose. This has been wonderful. And thank you to all the audience for coming and asking questions.
Thank you for having me too. This was